Okay, so this was our first slide that we saw in the last class. Just a second. Slideshow. All right. So we had discussed only the first 2 points: operator formalism and an idea of Hilbert space. And since both of these were almost completely new concepts, so we had to spend some time discussing these things. Uh, but today we'll discuss all the other subsequent points, that is an idea of observables, then determinate states, eigenfunctions of Hermitian operators. All these are basically mathematical concepts that you would require in order to understand the concept of simultaneous measurements, and then to go through the proof of the uncertainty principle. So this is the first time that you will see how to prove the uncertainty principle. In MD Ma'am's module, you've probably read through the concept of uncertainty principle, but now we'll have to prove it. And then we'll use these concepts that we will get from these 7 things that we discuss. We'll use those to discuss the example of the angular momentum of a particle. And finally, there is a very short discussion on completeness of measurements related to degeneracy. Okay, so let's start. Okay, we went through the operator formalism of quantum mechanics. We saw what an operator is. It's just simply a mathematical rule to transform a given function. And all this we discussed, and then we took an example and saw how an operator transforms a particular function into another function. And we said that we have to discuss operators in detail because every dynamical variable or observable in quantum mechanics is represented by an operator. Okay, and then we did some discussion on operator algebra, where we saw how addition and subtraction takes place, and then we saw that it is with multiplication that the first complication arises, because in multiplication of two operators, the order matters. So if you are multiplying b with a and then operating on it on a function, it will not give you the same result that would be obtained if you multiply a with b and then operate it on that same function. All right, and so came the concept of commutators. This commutator thing is the most important part of this entire module. It's the entire discussion is basically based on the physical meaning of commutators. Okay, so we'll just recap what commutator means. See, in the special case, if the order of multiplication does not matter, that is, if AB is equal to BA, then we say that the operators commute. And by definition, this is the definition of the mathematical form of commutator. You give a third bracket, inside you write the operators with a comma, and its result is AB minus BA. So obviously if they commute, then AB is 0, and if they don't commute, then AB is non-zero. So this is the mathematical concept. All right, and then we did an example showing when two operators do commute and when two operators do not commute. Okay, I'll just skip through this because we discussed this in detail, and I told you that coming up later is more on commutators, which will be discussed today. All right. Okay, then we went through some different types of operators. How many types of operators are there? And several types. We saw there was a linear operator, and we also saw that most operators that we go through in quantum mechanics right now are all linear operators. Okay, then inverse operator, identity operator, one of the most important operators because it gives you back the same function. Singular and non-singular comes from the concept of reciprocal of an operator, whether the reciprocal exists or not. Okay. Then we had an Hermitian operator. So all this builds up to the concept of a Hermitian operator, and a Hermitian operator is again one of the most important operators in quantum mechanics, and again we'll see why a Hermitian operator is one of the most important. So what is a Hermitian operator? To understand, to know what a Hermitian operator is very important. And this is the relation. When an operator A satisfies this relation, we call A a Hermitian operator. Okay. All right. So a Hermitian operator is a linear operator, and a Hermitian operator always has real eigenvalues. And then we saw what the adjoint or Hermitian conjugate of an operator is, and that also we defined. And finally we had the parity operator and the unitary operator. Okay, so these were the operators. Next we saw what the Hilbert space is. Okay, we hear of the Hilbert space several times, and we saw why knowing what the Hilbert space is very important for us when we are studying quantum mechanics, is because we know that quantum mechanics is concerned with the state of a system and the observables. State of a system is a wave function, observables are operators, wave function are basically abstract vectors, and operators are linear transformation. So basically quantum mechanics speaks the language of linear algebra, correct? But we now have to think about working in the n-dimensional space, not a regular 3-dimensional space. And then we saw how a particular function is represented in the n-dimensional space. Basically, I wanted you to know these symbols. I wanted you to get acquainted with these symbols. This is a state vector. This is the complex conjugate of a state vector. This is nothing but the dot product, or now that we call the inner product. Okay, and linear transformation are basically matrix operations where the matrix is now an n cross n matrix. So this kind of a relation would represent the transformation that we talk of. An operator acting on a particular function gives me back a different function. Okay. All right. So what we have to remember now is that in quantum mechanics, the vectors are not really vectors. They are actually functions representing the state of a system. And so they are continuous. They are not discrete. And therefore they exist in the infinite dimensional space, which in fact does not make our life very difficult if you must think in that way, because a wave function, in order to represent a possible physical state, has to be normalized. So we are not dealing with all kinds of functions. We are dealing with only those functions which are normalizable, because only then can we make it represent a particular physical state. All right. So this is the relation it must follow. It must be a normalized function, and we call this a square integrable function. And the set of all square integrable functions such that it follows this relation is what consists of the Hilbert space. We can clearly see that a wave function in quantum mechanics, which can be used to represent a possible physical state, that is, it must be a well-behaved function. Therefore, it is square integrable, and therefore it is a part of the Hilbert space. Okay, so nothing to get too worried about. What is now Hilbert space? What is infinite dimensional? Just know that the wave functions that we deal with are present in the Hilbert space. Okay, they are square integrable and they exist in the Hilbert space. So this is up to which we discussed yesterday, and we pick up from here in today's class. Okay, now inner product was defined as this. We have several times dealt with this kind of an expression, infinite integration a to b, which in most of our discussion become integration minus infinity to plus infinity. But remember, when we were discussing the square well or the 3D square well, this became the dimension of the well, 0 to a or minus L to plus L, something like that. Okay, so this that we discussed is nothing but the inner product. Now there is a particular relation called the Schwarz inequality. You just need to know this relation. You don't need to prove it or anything like that. It just tells you that the modulus of this, okay, is always less than or equal to the square of the individual square of the modulus of these functions. Okay, nothing much to discuss. This is just a mathematical relation that is used in several physical concepts. So from Schwarz inequality, we can see, now this is nothing but our inner product. So we can see that the inner product of two normalized wave function is always bound to exist in the Hilbert space. So if we are talking about two wave functions for a given problem, then their inner product, and if they are admissible wave functions, that is, if they do represent physical states of a particle or of a system, then they exist in the Hilbert space. And using Schwarz inequality, we can see that their inner product will also always exist in the Hilbert space. Okay, so we have confined our discussion. So we said we have to think about n dimensions, then we said we have to think about infinite dimensions, but now we see that all our discussions, all our mathematics is confined just within the confines of the Hilbert space. Okay, so we don't need to worry about any relation which does not comply with the conditions of the Hilbert space, because we know that then it is not an admissible wave function. If it is a wave function, it has to be there in the Hilbert space, and inner product of two such wave functions will also always be there in the Hilbert space. All right? Okay. Now, since we know now the definition of inner product, so what is the inner product of a function with itself? It is nothing but a to b mod fx square, which is our the square, and we know this is square integrable. So if the limits become minus infinity to plus infinity, we know that the inner product is 1. All right. So from this expression of the inner product of a function with itself, that is the dot product of a function with itself, we see that it is real, it is non-negative, it is a square, so it is non-negative, and it cannot vanish unless the function itself vanishes. So the concept of inner product becomes very, very important, because it is giving you a function, an expression which is real, non-negative, and which cannot vanish unless the function itself vanishes. And when the function vanishes, then obviously there is no particle or system at all to describe. So this becomes a trivial case. Now when the inner product is equal to 1, we say that the function is normalized. When the inner product is equal to the Kronecker delta, we say the function is orthonormal. And when the inner product, and when the function can be written as a linear combination of certain other functions like f and x, okay, then we say that the set of functions is complete. Now we discussed all these when we were discussing the wave function, the well-behaved, as a well-behaved function. We saw this integration equal to 1 means normalization. We saw when two wave functions are orthogonal and therefore orthonormal. All this were proved, remember, in one of our earlier classes. And we also said that a linear combination of such wave functions forms a complete set of the functions. So the same things can be spoken of in the premises of the Hilbert space, and we are talking of those in terms of the inner product. So you have to understand that the inner product, or this kind of an expression, is extremely important in all our discussions when we talk in terms of the Hilbert space and linear algebra. Okay, so we are now using the bracket notation, and this bracket notation, we'll see that this bracket notation makes our life easier when we are talking within the premises of the Hilbert space. All right. Okay. All right. So that is the completeness of function. Now, if you recall the definition of the expectation value of an observable or an operator, do you remember the definition of the expectation value? Why at all the concept of expectation value comes in? Okay, we saw that the expectation value is basically the average of the outcome of several measurements. So if as I told you, I remembered this, I was standing in our laboratory and explaining to you what expectation value is. So if you measure a particular observable for a given state, for a given particle, several times, the same function psi, you measure a particular observable several times on that function, you get different results every time. All right. So what do you do? What is the outcome of the measurement that you will use as a result? You take the average of all these measurements, and that is what we call the expectation value. It is the average of the outcome of several measurements on the same state. All right. And if you remember, we denote it like this. So this symbol that we used to denote expectation value is basically this inner product notation. Okay, we had skipped writing the psi, now we write it with the psi. So definition is this: psi star O psi dx, and in the inner product notation it is written like this. Okay, psi star is this oppositely directed bracket, and this is the O psi. All right, this is the definition of the expectation value in the inner product notation. All right. Now, since we are talking of a measurement, we are measuring, so it must be a physical quantity, and therefore it must be real. So expectation values can never be imaginary. Expectation values are averages of measurements, and measurements mean they must be real. All right. So expectation value has to be always a real. It cannot be an imaginary quantity. Therefore, we can easily write that expectation value is psi O psi. It can be easily written as O psi psi because it is, since it is real, so the imaginary, the complex conjugate is always equal to the actual function. So for expectation values of functions, this relation is always true. Now, what does this relation mean? This relation means that the operator is Hermitian. Remember the definition of a Hermitian operator? A Hermitian operator is such that its complex conjugate is equal to the original function. So, for the expectation value of an observable in quantum mechanics, the operator has to be Hermitian, which means, very, very important result, in quantum mechanics, observables are represented by Hermitian operators. So out of the several kinds of operators that exist, when we are talking about quantum mechanics, we are restricted to Hilbert space, and since observables are of well-behaved functions, since they are basically measurements, therefore they have to be real, which boils down to the statement that in quantum mechanics, observables are represented by Hermitian operators. This is why I told you Hermitian, knowing what a Hermitian operator is very, very important. Okay. Next, let us see what a determinate state is. Okay. Now, why was the expectation value introduced? Remember, why do we talk about expectation values at all? Because as I told you that every time you measure a particular quantity for a given state, each measurement gives you a different outcome. So we need to take the average. Okay, outcomes of different measurements on the same state are different, so that we need to take an average. And this is the indeterminacy of quantum mechanics. I told you that quantum mechanics is a stochastic science, it is a probabilistic science, and there is always an indeterminacy in the measurement of different quantities in quantum mechanics. Therefore, we always talk about probabilities. We saw what a probability current density is. We always talk about the probability of finding a particle at a position. Even when we did solve the different problems using Schrodinger equation, if you remember that even after getting the wave functions, we calculated the probability densities to know where is it most probable to find a particular particle in a given state of the system. When we were doing the free states, we did not deal with the actual functions. We dealt with the current densities. We dealt with the reflection coefficient and the transmission coefficient in terms of the current densities to know whether the particle is transmitted or tunneled or whatever, barrier penetration, etc. Okay, so this is a probabilistic science, and that is why the expectation value is our only sort of weapon. You know, the expectation value is our only weapon, our only tool to deal with quantities, because we don't have absolute values. So this is a probabilistic study. Now suppose there exists a state for which the outcome of the measurement of a given operator is always same, given by lambda. Can you predict where I am going? There exists a state for which the outcome of measurement of a given operator, for a given operator O, is always the same, a value lambda. When does this happen? If this does happen, then we can call it a determinate state. What does this mean? No matter how many times you measure this particular operator O for a given state, instead of giving us different outcomes, it is giving us a particular value. So out of the several indeterminate states, we can call this a determinate state. Example, stationary states. We just in our last two classes, we discussed the infinitely deep potential well, the 1D and 3D cases. And for the first time, we encountered quantization, and we saw that only those values of the quantum numbers that result in those particular energy values, they are the only allowed values, and we call them the stationary states. And in fact, in our previous free particle cases also, we saw that if the function is square integrable, that is, if the particle has to be found within the confines of a region, then the probability has to be 1. And in that case, the rate of change of probability becomes 0, so that it may be called a stationary state. So, for stationary states, these will be determinate states of the Hamiltonian, because they give a particular value of the eigenenergy, right? Measurement of total energy on a particle in such a stationary state is certain to give us the corresponding allowed energy En, depending on the value of n, the particular quantum number giving us the particular quantum state with the particular energy En. All right. Now, for such determinate states, therefore, the standard deviation must vanish. What is standard deviation? All of you have a concept of standard deviation. It is how deviated a particular measurement is from the average value, right? I hope all of you have a certain concept of standard deviation. When we take several measurements, even in the laboratory we calculate standard deviation, we calculate percentage error for our experiments. When we take several measurements and we take the average of all these measurements, then what we do is we calculate the difference of this average and each measurement. Suppose you've taken 10 measurements, then you subtract the value of each such measurement from the value of the average. All right, and that gives you the standard deviation of that particular measurement. Now, if the result is going to be the same every time, then the particular measurement and the average of all such measurements will be the same. So there will be no such difference, which means that there will be no standard deviation. Anyone has a question? Was someone asking something? Hello? Hello? Is it all right? Can I continue?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So determinate state means the standard deviation must vanish. So from the definition of standard deviation, we see that this standard deviation is written as sigma square. So O minus, this is a particular measurement and this is the average of all measurements. So the square of this difference must vanish. All right. Now what I have done is I have written for the average of this measurement, I have written lambda because it is a determinate state. So always the value given will be lambda. So I have written O minus lambda in place of expectation value of O, average of O. All right. So this gives me such an equation for the inner product. O minus lambda psi into O minus lambda psi, inner product with O minus lambda psi equal to 0. The fact that the standard deviation is 0. All right. So this can happen.
Hamiltonian.
This can happen only when the function itself is 0. Right? We just discussed in our previous slide that when the inner product of a function is 0, it is possible only when the function itself is 0. So the inner product of O minus lambda psi equal to 0 means that O minus lambda psi itself must be 0, which means O psi equal to lambda psi. Is this equation looking familiar? Can you identify this equation? কেউ একটু unmute করে বলো এটাকে কি equation বলে?
Eigenvalue.
Eigenvalue equation. Okay. So the fact that stationary states are determinate states results in the vanishing of the standard deviation, and that can happen only when it follows an eigenvalue equation. All right. So again, we have a very, very important statement. Determinate states are eigenfunctions of the corresponding observable and or operator. So we get two very, very important statements in consecutive slides. First, in quantum mechanics, an observable is always a Hermitian operator, and two, determinate states are always eigenfunctions of these Hermitian operators. All right. So outcome of measurement of the observable on such a state is the eigenvalue, and it is a certainty. No matter how many times you measure this particular state, you will always get the eigenvalue with certainty. Okay, so this is again a very, very important concept that we now got introduced. All right. Now,
ম্যাম ওই হ্যামিল্টনিয়ানটা একটু বলবেন।
কোনটা বলো তো? এই জায়গাটা,
হুম,
এই জায়গাটা
yes,
আমরা
yes.
তুমি যদি আমাদের ওই ইনফাইনাইট ডাইমেনশনাল ওয়েল যেটা আগের দিন, তার আগের দিন যেটা ডিসকাস করলাম, বাউন্ড স্টেটস, what we saw was that the eigenvalue equation was of what form? H psi equal to En, H psi n equal to En psi n. So what does that mean? That psi n is an eigenfunction of the Hamiltonian corresponding to the eigenvalue En. And these Ens are not continuous, they are discrete, decided by the value of n. So for a particular En, you get a particular psi n. All right, I'm talking of the one-dimensional case. For a particular En, you get a particular psi n. So
Yes, ma'am.
if you are in that state, no matter how you are measuring the Hamiltonian, you are always bound to get that particular value of En, because we saw in the expression of En that all the things are constants. H, M, A, the length of the box, everything is constant. The value of E is only decided by N. So if you are in the ground state, n equal to 1, and every time you will get back that particular value of E. If you are in the first excited state, n equal to 2, and every time you are going to get 2 square E1. Understood what I'm trying to say? So when you measure the ground state energy of hydrogen atom, no matter how you measure it, you are always bound to gain 13.6 MeV. You don't get any other value. You always get 13.6 MeV. So isn't that a determinate state? Understood?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So two things become very, very clear. First, observables in quantum mechanics are Hermitian operators, and determinate states are always eigenfunctions of such Hermitian operators. So in such states, when you are measuring a particular observable, the result is always the eigenvalue, and that is a certainty. Okay, all right. So since observables are always Hermitian operators and our wave function representing a particular system are always eigenfunctions of such Hermitian operators, we might as well discuss two very, very important concepts or properties of eigenfunctions of Hermitian operators. All right. So observables and their physically determinate states are eigenfunctions of Hermitian operators. So we will now discuss properties of eigenfunctions in Hilbert space. What are they? Two properties are very important. First, eigenvalues for the eigenfunctions of a Hermitian operator are always real. Okay, that is very obvious if you think about it intuitively without doing any mathematics, because if they are the outcome of a measurement, then it cannot be complex, it cannot be imaginary, because it is a physical quantity that you will get. Energy cannot be imaginary, it has to be a real quantity, and it can be shown very, very easily using some very trivial matrix algebra. Suppose we consider this eigenvalue equation O psi equal to lambda psi. All right. Now, since O is Hermitian, therefore this relation is true. But O psi equal to lambda psi, so lambda is a constant number. So you take lambda outside the bracket. So this becomes an inner product of psi. And this O psi is simply the complex conjugate. So that would give lambda star psi bracket psi. But this is true only if psi equal to 0, which is a trivial solution, which would mean that the thing doesn't exist. And the other possible solution is lambda equal to lambda star, which means that eigenvalues are always real. All right, this is one property. And then eigenfunctions belonging to distinct eigenvalues are always orthogonal. eigenvalues are real. Now suppose for a particular operator, you are operating a particular operator on two different eigenfunctions. Okay, so you will get distinct eigenvalues, and these functions belonging to different eigenvalues will always be orthogonal. So you cannot have a linear combination of eigenfunctions belonging to different eigenvalues. This is also a very, very important concept. Okay, proof again is very easy. So Hermitian operator O, we consider two equations. One is O psi equal to lambda psi, so eigenvalue lambda for eigenfunction psi, and O phi equal to lambda prime phi, so eigenfunction phi belonging to eigenvalue lambda prime. Alright, now since O is Hermitian, now what we do is we take the inner product of psi with O phi. But since O is Hermitian, we can just reverse this direction and write O psi equal to phi, O psi into phi. Now O phi is lambda prime phi. So from here, lambda prime comes out, you get the inner product of psi with phi. And from here, O psi, lambda star comes out because this is the complex conjugate, and you get the inner product of psi with phi again. Now, we know that lambda has to be real, eigenvalue has to be real. So, and we claimed in the beginning that lambda and lambda prime are different. So, lambda prime cannot be equal to lambda star because lambda star is equal to lambda. You understand what I'm saying? Lambda is not equal to lambda prime. Now, this relation will be true only if either this minus this is 0, psi inner product with phi minus psi inner product with phi is 0, or if lambda prime minus lambda star is 0. Now, since eigenvalue is real, so lambda star must be equal to lambda. But if lambda prime is equal to lambda star, then that means lambda prime equal to lambda, which cannot be true because we started off with two different eigenvalues. So the only other option is that psi and phi inner product has to be 0. When does the inner product of two different functions become 0? When they are orthogonal. So eigenfunctions belonging to different eigenvalues are always orthogonal. So from this too, we get two important results. One, that in the Hilbert space, eigenvalues are always real, and eigenfunctions belonging to different eigenvalues are always orthogonal. All right? Okay. Now comes the main part of our discussion. So all this that we had been discussing, the things that we recapitulated today from our last class and the new things that we discussed in today's class, all these are basically a build up to this. How commutativity of operators is related to simultaneous eigenfunctions. Okay, and as I promised that we have much more to see on commutators of two operators, and this is where we begin. Now, just for your ready reference, the definition of commutator of two operators OQ is OQ minus QO. If they commute, then commutator is 0, which means OQ equal to QO, and if they don't commute, then OQ not equal to 0 and OQ not equal to QO. So this we already know, and for our discussions further, I am keeping this in this slide for a ready reference. All right. Now we will discuss two very, very important properties related to commuting operators and their eigenfunctions. Very important, because this will lead to the result that follows regarding simultaneous measurement. First, operators that commute share the same set of eigenfunctions. So if two operators commute, they will have the same set of eigenfunctions. You can understand this is very, very important. Proof: Suppose we have two operators O and Q which commute, all right, and we have a one eigenvalue equation O psi equal to lambda psi, all right. Now since O and Q commute, therefore we can write O operating on Q psi equal to Q operating on O psi, but we have O psi equal to lambda psi, so this we can write as lambda psi. Lambda is a constant, so we take it out, so this becomes lambda into Q psi. So basically we have O operating on Q psi equal to lambda into Q psi. So that gives me another eigenvalue equation. O operating on Q psi equal to lambda into Q psi, as if Q psi is an eigenfunction of O with the same eigenvalue lambda. Psi is an eigenfunction of O with the eigenvalue lambda. And here we see, since O and Q commute, we have just proved that Q psi is also an eigenfunction of O with the same eigenvalue lambda. All right. So at most Q psi may be proportional to psi. That is, we can write Q psi equal to lambda prime psi, which means that psi is also an eigenfunction of Q with a different eigenvalue lambda prime. And of course, this will be true for the complete set of eigenfunctions, because complete set is simply a linear combination of each such eigenfunction. Therefore, commuting operators O and Q have the same set of eigenfunction. Very, very important relation. Now, what does this mean? O psi equal to lambda psi. What does this operation mean? This means that measurement of the observable O for the state psi gives the outcome lambda. And Q psi equal to lambda prime psi means measurement of the observable Q for the state psi gives the outcome lambda prime. This means therefore that these two observables are compatible and can be measured simultaneously. Since they have the same set of eigenfunctions, so there is no compatibility issue if you want to measure Q and O simultaneously for a given function. If you measure O for psi, it gives you lambda. If you measure Q for psi, it gives you lambda prime. But both have the same eigenfunction psi. So the system stays in the same state psi for measurement of both Q and O. And therefore, there will be no problem for you to measure such two quantities simultaneously. All right. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Umra just wrote that she's out of the call. Then others are there. Okay. Someone please write in the group that it's you all are connected. Ask her to reconnect. All right. So this is something very, very important that we learned. If two operators are commuting, they share the same set of eigenfunction, which actually means that these are simultaneously measurable, and such observables are called compatible observables. Okay? Next, just the converse of our previous statement. Here we saw operators that commute shared the same set of eigenfunctions. This statement says operators that shared the same set of eigenfunctions commute with each other. Okay, just the converse statement. Again, proof is similar. We now consider two eigenvalue equations. O psi equal to lambda psi and Q psi equal to lambda prime psi. All right, which means that we are starting off with two operators which share the same set of eigenfunctions with different eigenvalues lambda and lambda prime. right? So psi is the simultaneous eigenfunction of O and Q belonging to eigenvalues lambda and lambda prime respectively. Now let us take the operation Q on O psi. This means Q on lambda psi, lambda you take out, so this becomes lambda into Q psi, but Q psi is lambda prime psi, so this becomes lambda lambda prime psi. So basically Q O psi is equal to lambda lambda prime psi. Again, if you take OQ psi, then this becomes O lambda prime psi. You take lambda prime outside, so this becomes lambda prime O psi, and so this again becomes lambda prime lambda psi. Now lambda and lambda prime are just algebraic quantities, they're just numbers, all right? So obviously the order of multiplication does not matter. Lambda into lambda prime is the same as lambda prime into lambda. So we get OQ psi minus QO psi is equal to lambda prime lambda minus lambda lambda prime into psi, which is equal to 0, right? This is OQ psi we get from here, and QO psi we get from here, and we write the values lambda prime lambda minus lambda lambda prime, and we see that it is 0, which means nothing but the fact that O and Q commute. So if you start with commuting operators, you get simultaneous eigenfunctions. If you start with operators having simultaneous eigenfunctions, you end up with the fact that these operators commute. So operators having simultaneous eigenfunctions commute. Once again, this gives you the same physical concept. Measurement of the observable O for the state psi gives outcome lambda. Measurement of the observable Q for the state psi gives the outcome lambda prime, and therefore these two observables are compatible and simultaneously measurable. So the two theorems, one saying that commuting operators have same eigenfunctions, that tells us the fact that such operators are compatible, and again the other theorem that if two operators have the same eigenfunctions, then they commute, that gives you the same concept that such two operators are compatible. Now let us see how compatible and incompatible observables are related to simultaneous measurements. How are these related to the fact that they can or cannot be measured simultaneously? Okay. So we just found out that when two operators possess a common eigenfunction and therefore they commute, they are called compatible operators, all right? Which means that they can be measured simultaneously. Now, obviously, the converse of this statement is that when two operators do not commute, they will not possess a common eigenfunction, and then we will call them incompatible operators, which means that they cannot be measured simultaneously. Now it will be clear to you if we take an example and see what these statements are trying to say. First example is position and corresponding component of linear momentum, x and px. What we do is, suppose we have a particle, we measure x, we'll get an outcome, right? A particle is moving non-relativistically. At any instant of time you measure x, so you get an outcome. Then you measure linear momentum in the x direction. You will get a particular result, a value of linear momentum. Now, if you measure position again, you will find that the outcome does not match with the first result. Okay? Why does this happen? Why does the measurement of px in between change the outcome of the measurement of the same observable x on the same particle? Now, what is happening when we are measuring x? When we are measuring the position of the particle basically goes to an eigenstate of x. Now, what is an eigenstate of x? It must be a delta function, several wave packets converging to form a delta function, because the moment you are pinpointing on a particular position of the particle, you are saying with surety that the particle exists only there and nowhere else, which is possible only for a delta function. Clear? So the eigenstate of the position has to be a delta function. So the moment you are measuring the position of a particle, you are sending the particle to an eigenstate of x, which is a delta function. Now, next, when you are measuring px, the particle is now sent through an eigenstate of px, but the eigenstate of px is a sine wave. And you know that a sine wave has infinite spread. So the moment you get a value of the momentum, which means you are getting a particular value of the wavelength. And the moment you are getting a particular value of the wavelength, it means there is a well-defined wave, a sine wave, and a sine wave extends from minus infinity to plus infinity. So what happens? The value of x becomes completely undetermined. So measurement of the momentum depletes the memory of the first result of the measurement of x. So the particle is sent to the eigenstate of x, and now when you eigenstate of px, and now when you again try to measure the position, you will get a new result because the particle has been sent to some new position and a delta function is formed there. Okay, so basically position and corresponding linear momentum are incompatible operators. They cannot be measured simultaneously with perfect accuracy. Is this clear to you, or do you want me to explain this once more? Please let me know. Unmute yourself and please let me know, do you want me to discuss this thing once more? Because this is the basic concept. I cannot give you mathematics. This is something you have to realize. So if you have realized it, then I'll go to the next slide. Otherwise, please tell me. I'm ready to explain this once more, but this is very, very important. আরেকবার কি বলবো? না ঠিক আছে?
বুঝতে তো পেরেছি সেরকম। বুঝতে পারছি, মানে ইনকম্পারেবল হয়ে গেছে, তাই জন্য আইগেনস্টেটে অন্য, তাই জন্য এই ডেল্টা ফাংশনটা অন্য জায়গায় ফর্ম করছে, তো ওইটুকু মানে বুঝতে পেরেছি কনসেপ্টটা, কিন্তু আরেকবার বললেও ভালোই হয় একবার।
হ্যাঁ, যেটা হচ্ছে তাহলে আমি একবার বাংলায় বলছি। আমি যেই একটা পার্টিকেলের পজিশন মেজার করলাম, আমি একটা ভ্যালু পেলাম, ধরো 5 সেন্টিমিটার ফ্রম দ্য অরিজিন। নাও হোয়াট ডাজ 5 সেন্টিমিটার ফ্রম দ্য অরিজিন মিন? It means that I am getting a spike at that point, at 5 centimeter from the origin. I am pinpointing on one particular position, which means it has to be a delta function. The particle doesn't exist anywhere else. It's a delta function. All right? But the moment now when I measure momentum of the particle is sent, I suppose, and I get a result, a value for the momentum, some mass into velocity unit, okay, kg meter per second value. But the moment I get this value, we know that momentum is related to wavelength, and a particular a distinct value of a wavelength means we are having a distinct wave. So the eigenfunction of the momentum is a sine wave, and a sine wave means it can extend from minus infinity to plus infinity, and the position of the particle can be anywhere between minus infinity to plus infinity. So the delta function that we got for the particle at 5 centimeters from the origin completely diffuses out. It completely collapses the moment you measure momentum and get an accurate value of the momentum. Now when you then try to বলো
ম্যাম বলছি, মানে ধরুন আপনি প্রথমে ডিফাইন করে দিলেন পার্টিকেল ইজ এট 5 সেন্টিমিটার ফ্রম দ্য অরিজিন, তো as soon as I say that particle has momentum, তো ওটাও তো এটাও সিগনিফাই করছে যে পার্টিকেল ইজ ইন মোশন, তো তার জন্য তো এই 5 সেন্টিমিটারটা নেক্সট
পার্টিকেল সবসময় ইন মোশন, মোশনের মধ্যেই আমি একটা পার্টিকুলার ইনস্ট্যান্ট ওই 5 সেন্টিমিটারটা দেখতে পেয়েছি।
আচ্ছা, বুঝতে
হ্যাঁ,
পেরেছি Yes, yes.
এটার মানে হচ্ছে যে ইন বিটুইন এই যে মোমেন্টাম মেজারমেন্টটা করলাম, that sends the particle to the eigenstate of the momentum operator and therefore depletes the memory of the eigenstate of the position operator completely, and when next measure the position value, you get a different result. So the concept is that you cannot measure position and momentum simultaneously with complete accuracy. If you get a complete accurate value of x, then accuracy of momentum is 0. If you get a complete accurate value of momentum, then the accuracy of position is 0. So this is the concept of compatible observables. And from this qualitative discussion, you can say that
ম্যাম কথা
position,
কেটে যাচ্ছে
okay, from this qualitative
কথা
observation, কেটে যাচ্ছে এখনো?
হ্যাঁ কেটে যাচ্ছে
এই রে, ওকে, জাস্ট দেখো হচ্ছে কিনা। From this qualitative discussion, হ্যাঁ, হ্যালো হ্যালো,
ম্যাম পুরো কথা কেটে গেল মাঝখানে যেটা
আচ্ছা
বললেন
আচ্ছা, দাঁড়াও আমি দেখছি।
ম্যাম এখানে শুনে যাচ্ছে, ওটা ওই দিক থেকে প্রবলেম হচ্ছে মনে হয়।
হ্যাঁ, মানে সবার জন্য
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম আপনার আওয়াজটা পুরো ক্লিয়ার আছে
ম্যাম
সবার
না,
জন্য
ম্যাম।
কি অসুবিধা হচ্ছে?
ম্যাম আপনার দিক থেকে প্রবলেম হচ্ছে না ওটা।
না, আমার তো মানে ফুল টাওয়ারই দেখাচ্ছে। আমার
তাহলে
তো
মনে হয় আমার প্রবলেম না, আমারও তো ফুল টাওয়ার আছে না বাইরে কাট
আচ্ছা, স্লাইড গুলো ফলো করো একটু।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, ওকে। সো
Right.
ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে মানে, সো ফ্রম this qualitative discussion we can write down that the commutator of position and corresponding linear momentum is non-zero, that these two do not commute. Okay, next we take the example of linear momentum and kinetic energy, px square by 2m. Okay, just a second. So now you measure px, you get an outcome, then you measure kinetic energy, you get an outcome, and then you measure px again, you get the same value as the first one. Why? Because measurement of one observable px has no effect on the subsequent measurements of the other, because they possess simultaneous eigenfunctions. We know energy and momentum possess the same. The eigenfunction of the Hamiltonian can be written in terms of an eigenfunction of the momentum operator as well. So they possess simultaneous eigenfunctions and therefore they are compatible operators. So linear momentum and corresponding kinetic energy, sorry, this will not be linear kinetic energy, this will be kinetic energy. They are compatible operators. And the moment you say this, you can say that their commutator is equal to 0. They are commuting operators. So it is possible to measure both linear momentum and kinetic energy of a particle at a particular instant with perfect accuracy, no problem. Okay, so this is the concept of simultaneous measurement and commutativity of operators. Compatible operators will be measured simultaneously, and non-compatible operators cannot be measured simultaneously. Okay, so we saw that in case of compatible operators, the commutator is 0. They commute. What happens in case of non-compatible observables? How do we then measure non-compatible observables? Is it not possible to measure at all? It is, with the idea of the uncertainty principle. So herein comes in our uncertainty principle, when the concerned operators are non-compatible with each other. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll prove the generalized uncertainty principle. Till now you knew the uncertainty principle as delta x delta px greater than equal to h cut by 2. What we'll do is we will get an expression for the uncertainty principle for any two non-compatible operators, not only position and momentum, but any two. That is why we call it the generalized uncertainty principle. So once again, I have written down the expression for standard deviation in the measurement of an observable A. We have an observable A, and this is the expression of its standard deviation. We have written it finally as the inner product of a function f, where f we have substituted as A minus expectation value of A. All right. So similarly, standard deviation for another observable B can be written as this, and we call it inner product of G with G, where G is B minus expectation value of B on operating on psi. Of course, A and B are non-compatible observables, and from these two relations we can write delta A square multiplied by delta B square is equal to f dot f multiplied with g dot g, and this has to be greater than modulus of fg square. From where do we get this? From Schwarz inequality. Remember, in the beginning we introduced Schwarz inequality, which says that separately the product of two inner products has to be lesser than the inner product of the two functions. So using Schwarz inequality, we can write that f dot f multiplied with g dot g must be greater than mod square of f dot g. All right. Now for any complex number z, we can write z mod square equal to real z square plus imaginary z square. So this has to be greater than imaginary z square. Z mod square, if it is sum of these two, so it has to be greater than just one part of the sum, that is, it is greater than imaginary z square. Again, imaginary part of z square can be written like this. You can work it out and see, 1 by 2i into z minus z star whole square. So which means that z square mod z square must be greater than equal to 1 by 2i z minus z star whole square. So what we do is we write f dot g as z. F dot f or g dot g is always real, but f dot g may or may not be real. So we write z equal to f dot g. Therefore, z star is g dot f. So we can write this from here, since delta a square delta b square is greater than equal to mod f dot g square, and mod f dot g square we get is greater than this. So we can write delta a square delta b square greater than equal to 1 by 2i z f dot g minus z star g dot f whole square. All right. I mean, I'm just showing you the steps. Once you do this by writing, yourself, the thing will be clear. The same proof is also given in your notes. All the steps I'm showing you once again. I'm not skipping any step. Once you do it by hand yourself, this thing will be clear. I've used the proof given in the book of Griffiths because that is the only book where I found this bracket notation. Integration notation makes the proof extremely cumbersome. All right, now putting back the value of f and g. Remember, we took f as a minus average a psi and g as b minus average b psi. So putting back the value of f and g, we get f dot g as this, a minus a average psi dotted with b minus b average psi. All right, so we take the a minus a average and b minus b average inside and the psi's outside, and so this can be, now I expand, I make this multiplication and I write ab minus a average b minus average ab plus average a into average b. Okay, so f dot g is, now we take each term separately. Psi, AB psi, minus psi A average B psi minus psi average A B psi plus psi average A average B psi. All right. So, okay. Now, since average B is just a number, so we can take this outside the inner product. Average A is also just a number, so we can take that outside the inner product. And here both average A and average B are numbers, so we take them outside the inner product. So it gets simplifies as this is nothing but expectation value of AB. All right. This is nothing but expectation value of A. So this becomes average B into average A. Again, this is nothing but expectation value of B. So this becomes average A into average B. And finally, we write this as a product of average A, average B, because we know psi is normalized. So inner product of psi into psi is 1. So what we are left with is, all right, so this and this cancels out. We have average of AB minus average B into average A. Now in the same process, if you calculate G inner product with F, just like we calculated F inner product with G, you will get the result BA average minus average A average B. So if you now subtract F dot G minus G dot F, you are left with AB average minus BA average, because these are expectation values, so they are just numbers. So these the order of multiplication of these do not matter, so they cancel out. So you are left with AB average minus BA average, which is nothing but the average of the commutator A with B. Therefore, we have the very, very important result that delta A square into delta B square is greater than equal to 1 by 2i average of commutator of A, B whole square. All right. This is the generalized statement of the uncertainty principle for any non-commutable operators, any two non-compatible operators A and B. Clearly from here you can see that if the operators A and B are compatible, then their commutator is 0, and then the product of these standard deviation becomes 0 because this is 0. All right. So then there is no concept of uncertainty anymore. You can get both the values with absolute certainty. This is true only when they don't commute and the commutator AB is non-zero. Now this will be clear if you take two examples. In fact, we will take. One is the position and linear momentum relation. First observable is position, second observable is x component of linear momentum. So you take the commutator, you compute the commutator first, and you'll see that the value of the commutator is IH cut. So if you use this in the expression of the general statement of the uncertainty, what you get is delta x, delta px is greater than equal to h cut by 2, which is our well-known Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which was initially applicable only for xpx, but later on proved for any two non-compatible operators. Next, we take the energy time relation. Total energy operator H psi is equal to IH del T psi. So the commutation between H Hamiltonian and time T can be computed and shown to be IH cut psi. So that commutator is IH cut psi, H cut. So in the general statement, you have delta E, delta T greater than equal to H cut by 2. So once again, the uncertainty principle tells us that the relative minimum size of the uncertainties in the values of the two non-commuting quantities, if we try to measure them simultaneously. What we know that when two operators are compatible, we can measure them simultaneously. How do we measure two operators which are non-compatible? We can measure them, but using the uncertainty principle, we will know that there is a relative minimum size in the values of these quantities when we are trying to measure them simultaneously. We get a particular value of x, we get a particular value of px, but we have to understand that those are not accurate values. There is an uncertainty in the value of x, there is an uncertainty in the value of px, and the product of these two uncertainties is always greater than equal to h cut by 2, so that this gives us the relative minimum size of the uncertainties. Okay, I hope you have understood how we have built up from the concept of Hermitian operators to the fact that we are dealing in Hilbert space, to the fact that observables and operators are nothing but eigenfunctions of Hermitian operators. Then we studied the properties of eigenfunctions of Hermitian operators and used them to show what happens when the commutator of two operators is or is not equal to 0, giving us the concept of compatible and incompatible operators, showing us when two operators can be measured simultaneously, and when they cannot be measured simultaneously, then comes in the role of the uncertainty principle, giving us the minimum size of the uncertainties if we try to measure them simultaneously. All right, and now we'll just go through the problem of, or the concept of, angular momentum, which will be a discussion in perspective of whatever we have discussed till now. Okay, this is an example which shows how two operators can or cannot be compatible. All right, I'm following exactly the statements of your syllabus, the way it has been given in your syllabus. I'm following the exact steps. Okay, now the classical definition of angular momentum of a particle is, we know, L equal to R cross P. All of you know this. And if you do this cross product, then this is the result that you get. The I, J, and K components of angular momentum L. And in operator notation, we know that momentum P can be written as minus IH cut del, the gradient, so that we can write L as R cross minus IH cut del, so that it is minus IH R cross del. All right, in the Cartesian coordinate system now, R is equal to sum of the three Cartesian coordinates, and del, you know, is written in this manner, differential operator, partial differential operator. So if you now make the cross product, then angular momentum becomes this expression, which gives you a value of the different components of the angular momentum. So we can write Lx as IH cut y del del z minus z del del y, and so on and so forth for Ly and Lz. All right, and you can easily identify that Lx, Ly, and Lz are basically in terms of position and momentum. Y pz minus z py, z px minus x pz, x py minus y px. Okay, and also important is this value square of the angular momentum, which is Lx square plus Ly square plus Lz square. Now, why do we need this? Where will we apply them? We want to study the commutation relations of the angular momentum operator and its components. Okay. See, commutator of Lx and Ly. You write the expressions of Lx and Ly in the commutator, and you compute the commutator. Okay, you have to do this by hand. It doesn't make sense that I read through the derivations. Now we just have to remember that xpx, ypy, and zpz, these are the pairs of non-commuting operators. We know position and corresponding component of linear momentum do not commute. So these are the pairs of non-commuting operators. Other pairs are all zero. Other pairs are always zero. Only these pairs are non-zero. So immediately we can cross out these two terms. These become 0 because they do not contain the non-commuting pairs. So we are left with these two commutators. Okay, now if you expand them and then take commons, you will find that this is equal to IH cut xpy minus ypx, but xpy minus ypx is LZ, so this is IH cut LZ. So summarizing for the three pairs of components, we can write Lx Ly commutator is IH cut LZ, Ly Lz commutator is IH cut Lx, and Lz Lx commutator is IH cut Ly. So you see components of the same operator, but individually when you pair them, they do not commute, which means that Lx, Ly and Lz are incompatible or non-compatible observables. They do not possess simultaneous eigenfunctions, and it is not possible to measure the three components of the angular momentum at the same time. You cannot measure the three components at the same time. Although they are simply components of the same operator, even then, from the commutator relation, you find that they are not measurable simultaneously. And this has very, very important consequences in the in atomic physics when you study the structure of atoms. This is from where the concept of angular momentum quantum number comes. Okay, and then we'll check the commutation relation of L squared with Lx. And again, I've simply written it. You can check it by writing yourself. It is also given in the notes. So clearly, Lx square and Lx, this is the commutator of one operator with just the power of the same operator. So this will be 0 and the others stay on. So if you elaborate, then you are left with, it expands to this kind of an expression. We have used this relation here, that commutator AB into C is A commutator BC plus AC commutator into B, and using these relations, Ly-Lx is IH cut Lz, Ly-Lx IH cut Lz, Lz-Lx is IH cut Ly, and Lz-Lx is IH cut Ly. We get L square Lx is 0. So summarizing for all the three components, we find L square Lx is 0, L square Ly is 0, L square Lz is 0, which means that L square is compatible with each component of L. Hence, there is existence of simultaneous eigenfunctions of L square and Lx, of L square and Ly, and of L square and Lz. Therefore, L square and the respective components of the angular momentum can be measured at the same time. All right. So we discussed what simultaneous measurement and the concept of compatible and non-compatible operators are, and then we use the angular momentum operator to show that components of the individual components of the angular momentum operator are non-compatible, cannot be measured simultaneously, but each component is compatible with the square of the angular momentum operator and therefore can be measured simultaneously. Since it is only given in your syllabus that discussion in terms of angular momentum, I've kept my discussion till here. Although in Griffith's book, from here they develop how to get the value of the eigenvalues of these operators, and therefore how the concept of angular momentum quantum number in atoms come in. So if you want, I can send you a scanned copy of this chapter of Griffith's book. If you do want it, please send me a WhatsApp message that, ma'am, please send the scanned copy of this chapter, because entirely I have taken this chapter from Griffith's book, mostly. Okay, so you can, if you want, I can send you the scanned copy, but you have to inform me in WhatsApp because I'll forget it. And finally, this is the last slide, completeness of measurements, but problem arising with degeneracy. Okay, so quickly, we know that when Schrodinger equation has more than one linearly independent solution for the same value of the eigenvalue or eigenenergy, we say that particular value is degenerate. And if k eigenstates correspond to the same eigenvalue, we get the degree of degeneracy. We say this particular eigenvalue is k-fold degenerate. All right. So a linear combination of such degenerate eigenstates is also an eigenstate of the operator. So what is happening when you have a degeneracy? That you are not getting a unique eigenstate for a given eigenvalue. All right. And we also saw that if two operators commute, then every eigenvector of one is also an eigenvector of the other with the same eigenvalue or different. So if this eigenvalue is degenerate, then we can say that it belongs to the complete set of eigenvectors of operators. So you can understand the problem arising when eigenvalues are degenerate, the outcome of a particular measurement is no longer unique, right? If you remember the three-dimensional box potential problem, suppose you have a particular eigenvalue, but that measurement of total energy on that can give you either, say, the first excited state. It is threefold degenerate. So a measurement of the energy in the first excited state can give you three corresponding states, either 211 or 121 or 112. Any one of these states are equally probable, right? So the moment that happens, you cannot zero in on one particular value, right? So that you cannot say you are getting a particular value for the measurement, but you cannot uniquely say which energy state that value belongs to unless you look at the energy state also. And a linear combination of all these energy states is also an eigenvalue. So the moment the until the eigenvalue is degenerate, if it is unique, then all the discussions that we did till now are okay. The moment the eigenvalue becomes degenerate, the moment degeneracy steps in, you cannot any longer say that the outcome of measurement that you've got is complete, because it can, although the value is unique, but you can relate it to any one of the corresponding eigenstates and even a linear combination of all those eigenstates. So problem arises with degeneracy, and then you have to assign a complete eigenspace for a corresponding degenerate eigenvalue. All right, I've written this thing in detail in the notes that I've given you. You can read through, and if you have any problem understanding, then you can tell me. এখানটা কি আরেকবার বলতে হবে এই ডিজেনারেসির ব্যাপারটা? হ্যালো, হ্যাঁ
না বলতে হবে, এটা তো বুঝতে পারছি।
হ্যাঁ, মানে বুঝতেই পারছো যে যেই ডিজেনারেট হয়ে গেল আর